How far would you go to protect the ones you love, even if it meant challenging everything you believe? Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie is a heart-stopping exploration of loyalty, identity, and the ripple effects of political decisions on personal lives. It's a book that feels as urgent as it is timeless, weaving an intricate tale of love, betrayal, and the clash between private and public responsibilities. This modern reimagining of Antigone places these ancient themes into a contemporary context, offering characters so vivid and flawed that you can't help but feel their struggles as your own. It's provocative and unforgettable, leaving you with questions that linger long after you've closed the book. This book is nothing short of sensational, no notes, no edits, absolutely perfect. This is a book where the personal becomes deeply political, presenting one of the most nuanced and detailed character studies in modern fiction. It's the kind of work that feels destined to become a modern classic. At its heart is a politician from a Muslim background who has risen to prominence within the Conservative Party by targeting the very community he comes from. Through xenophobic policies, scare tactics, and perpetuating harmful stereotypes, he gains the favor of Britain's white majority. But then, his son falls in love with a Muslim girl, and everything begins to unravel. We also follow the girl's family, whose history is steeped in complexity. Her father was once radicalized, and now her brother, disillusioned and alienated by the politician's very policies, seems to be heading down a dangerous path. This intertwining of personal lives and political realities makes for a bold and powerful narrative that challenges and provokes at every turn. What makes this book extraordinary is its refusal to shy away from hard questions and uncomfortable truths. It's masterfully written, silky smooth, yet brimming with intensity. Shamsie draws us deeply into the humanity of her characters, allowing us to empathize with them even when we don't share their beliefs or condone their actions. And the crescendo, that breathtaking, gut-wrenching climax stays with you long after you turn the final page. Today, I'll be reading a passage that captures the tension and emotional weight of the story. It's a moment where we see the intricate dance of power, love, and loss come to life. Let's dive in. One of my grandmother's friends had said the British government would withdraw all the benefits of the welfare state, including state school and the NHS, from any family it suspected of siding with the terrorists. Eamonn made a face of distaste, clearly offended in a way that told her he saw the state as part of himself, something that had never been possible for anyone in her family. She raised a hand to hold off his objections. My mother knew that wasn't true, but she allowed my grandmother to believe it. So that was that until 2004, when a Pakistani man released from Guantanamo contacted my father's family in Pakistan to say he had been imprisoned at Bagram with my father from early 2002. In June that year, both he and my father were among the men put on a plane for transport to Guantanamo. My father died during takeoff, some sort of seizure. He said other things also about what happened to my father in Bagram, but the family in Pakistan said no one needed those images in their head and didn't tell us. No one told you he was dead for 2 years. Who was going to tell us? The Americans, British intelligence. We weren't told anything. We still haven't been told anything. They haven't released records of Bagram from that time period. We don't even know if anyone bothered to dig a grave. I'm sure they dug a grave, he said. Why? Because they're so civilized. She had promised herself she wouldn't lie to him, and that included not curtailing her rage. I'm sorry. I was trying to. I'm sorry. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you, for your whole family. She made a helpless, hopeless gesture. We didn't talk about it. We were forbidden to talk about it. Only Auntie Nazim and her daughters who lived across the road knew, because we were essentially one family divided into 2 households. Other than that, there was only one other person who was told, a man who my grandparents had known since they first moved to Wembley, and there were so few Asian families around that all of them knew each other. On my grandmother's behalf, this man went to visit his cousin's son, a first-term MP, and asked if the British government could find out any information about Adil Pasha, who died on his way to Guantanamo and whose family deserved answers. They're better off without him, the MP said, and left the room. That was my father. Yes, he slumped forward, his face in his hands. She wanted to run her fingers through his thick hair, stroke his arm. There was a lightness inside her, entirely new, that made the whole world rearrange itself into a place of and rent of possibilities. In this lightness, Aneeka's anger was short-lived, Parvez's choices reversible. He looked up, held her gaze. "Can I?" he said, pointing to a spot on the bed next to her. She nodded, not trusting her voice enough to use it. The mattress dipped slightly beneath his weight. He took her hand, looked at her with deep feeling in those brown eyes of his. "I'm so sorry for everything you've suffered," he said. "You're a remarkable woman," and then he patted her hand once, twice, and let go of it. "You need to understand something about my father." She didn't want to understand anything about his father. She wanted his hand back, sending currents through her, including in the most intimate places. Almost as if he'd touched her there. "It's harder for him," he said, because of his background. Early on, in particular, he had to be more careful than any other MP, and at times that meant doing things he regretted. But everything he did, even the wrong choices, were because he had a sense of purpose. Public service, national good, British values, he deeply believes in these things. All the wrong choices he made, they were necessary to get him to the right place, the place he is now. There he sat, his father's son. It didn't matter if they were on this or that side of the political spectrum, or whether the fathers were absent or present, or if someone else had loved them better, loved them more. In the end, they were always their father's sons. "I'm not saying that makes it okay," he said. He touched 2 fingers to his temple, rubbed. Perfect half-moons in his fingernails. "I'm not very good at this. He should be the one explaining. I'll tell you what. Next time you're in London, you can meet. I'll set it up. Confront him with this, make him account for it. He'd be up for that. My guess is you'll feel more favorably about him at the end. Meet Karamat Lone. Mr. British values, Mr. Strong on security, Mr. Striding away from Muslimness. He would say, I know about your family. You're better off without your brother, too." And Eamonn, his devoted son, would sadly have to agree. "Don't sound so worried about it. He'll be nice. For my sake." He took hold of a strand of her hair, pulled it lightly. "Now that I've seen your head uncovered, I'm practically your brother, aren't I? Is that what you are? Sorry, is that too presumptuous?" She stood, turned, shrugged. "No, it's fine," she said, making her voice light, making him seem absurd for sounding so serious about it. "Oh, look, I never made you that cup of tea, and now I have to go out. Appointment. Will you come to the cafe after?" "Probably not today. Actually, maybe not for a while. A friend has invited me to come and spend the rest of spring break at her place. Not strictly untrue." At the end of their meal the previous night, Hira had said, "You're welcome to move into my spare room for a few days if you want company. Don't be heartbroken alone." "Oh, but then we won't see each other. I'll be leaving in the next day or 2. News cycle already moving on from my father, and to tell you the truth, I think I'm cramping my grandparents' social life. Well, then, I'm glad we cleared the air," she said, holding herself straight-backed, upright. "Me too. Well, goodbye. Thanks for being such a fantastic coffee companion." He stepped forward and held his arms out slightly awkwardly. What followed was not an embrace so much as to bodies knocking into each other then moving away. He smiled, pushed his hair back from his face in a way that already felt as familiar to her as the tics of people she'd grown up with. She watched him put on his wellies, button up his coat, smile again, turn to go. His hand reached for the doorknob, and then he paused. "Isma." Yes, the trace of hope still working its way through her veins. He picked up the padded envelope from the kitchen counter, which was filled with M&Ms. There was a long-running joke between the neighboring households about Auntie Nassim's sweet tooth for American confectionery after a vacation there in the 1980s. This the same package you had in the cafe last week. Weren't you going to the post office with it? Keep forgetting, she said. He tucked it under his arm. I'll post it from London. There's no need. It's really no problem. Cheaper and quicker. Oh, okay. Thanks. Bye, sis, he said with a wink. Then he stepped through the door and closed it behind him. She ran over to her balcony. Moments later, he stepped out onto the street, rolling back his shoulders as if released from the weight of her company. He walked away without looking up, his stride long. Isma knelt down on the snow-dusted balcony floor and wept. A kayak glided high above the stationary traffic of the North Circular Road, to ducks paddling in its wake. Eamonn stopped along the canal path, looked over the edge of the railing. Cars backed up as far as he could see. All the years he'd been down there, he'd taken this aqueduct for just another bridge. Nothing to tell you that canal boats and waterfowl were being carried along above your head. Always these other Londons in London. He typed canal above North Circular into his phone, followed a link that led to another link, and was soon watching news footage of a bomb planted on this bridge by the IRA in 1939. When the newsreader came to details of what would have happened if the bridge had been destroyed, he clicked pause mid-sentence and hurriedly strode on. But today was not a day to worrying about the precariousness of things. It was the start of April, and London was bursting into spring, magnolia flowers opening voluptuously on the trees in Little Venice where he'd entered the towpath. Now he was walking along a wilder terrain, weeds and bushes growing in all directions, sometimes tall enough to hide the industrial blight that lay beyond, sometimes not. And then it changed again. It became beautiful, almost rural swans on the bank, yellow buds studding the trees, a man and his dog both snoring on the roof of a canal boat, the sky an expanse of blue smeared with white. Isma, the invisible presence, walking alongside him, her expression intense except when he could make her smile. He wondered if she would get in touch next time she was in London. Probably not. Despite their attempt to clear the air, the history of their fathers had made things between them far too strange. He tried to imagine growing up knowing your father to be a fanatic, his death a mystery open to terrible speculation, but the attempt was defeated by his simple inability to know how such a man as Adil Pasha could have existed in Britain to begin with. He left the canal path near high-rises embodying the word regeneration and was soon on Ealing Road, walking past Gurkha Superstore, Gamma Halo Meat, a Hindu temple intricately carved of limestone, cheerful stalls and restaurants. He couldn't point to anything in particular he recognized, yet he had complete certainty that he had looked out a car window onto this street many times in his childhood. "We're going," is all his father would say before the annual outings to Eamonn's great uncle's house every Eid. A holiday that his mother explained as marking the end of the month of not observing Ramzan for all of us. On that one day of the year, his father became someone else, and it was this that he knew his mother hated as much as he did. Surrounded by his extended family, Karamat Lone disappeared into another language, with its own gestures and intonations even when he was speaking English. One year, when Eamonn was 9 or 10, Eid fell just after Christmas. The American family was visiting, and there were plans every day for outings with cousins. "You don't have to come this year," his father agreed after some judiciously timed postprandial Christmas Day pleading, and went on his own. The next year it was, "Do you want to come?" and he didn't seem to mind when his wife and children said no. Just when Eamonn was becoming old enough to want to know the part of his father's life that remained so mysterious, there was the whole business with the mosque photographs and a falling out with the cousins over the necessary damage control. He was nearing a mosque, crossed the street to avoid it, then crossed back so as not to be seen trying to avoid a mosque. Everyone always went on about the racism his father had had to face when a section of the press tried to brand him an extremist. But it was London's Muslim population who had turned their back on Karamat Lone and voted him out, despite all the good he'd done for his constituents, all because he'd expressed a completely enlightened preference for the conventions of a church over those of a mosque, and spoke of the need for British Muslims to lift themselves out of the Dark Ages if they wanted the rest of the nation to treat them with respect. On the high road now, with its pound stores and pawn shops, glancing up every so often at the bone-white rainbow of Wembley Stadium for its reassuring familiarity, and then north toward Preston Road, where everything turned residential, suburban. Any one of these semi-detached houses could be the home in which he'd spend all those Eid afternoons, sitting pressed against his mother in an alliance she tried to push him out of, knowing that he would rather be in the garden playing cricket with the boy cousins whose invitations to join them were located confusingly at the border between the merely polite and the genuine. His sister, habitually free of the burden of alliances, would be upstairs with the girl cousins, throwing herself into a rapture of family feeling that would disappear as soon as they were back in Holland Park. She was, everyone said, her father's daughter, a claim she was proving with her determined ascent at 22 through the world of investment banking in Manhattan. On the rare occasions he remembered his father's family, it was only to recall the feelings of estrangement that visits to them brought up, but spending time with Isma had reminded him that there were other, more familial feelings. She evoked in particular his father's youngest cousin, the one who once affixed a band-aid and a healing kiss on his elbow when he took a tumble in the garden, gashing open his skin. He wondered if, in turn, he reminded Isma of Parvez, the younger brother to whom she referred only in passing, twin to the beautiful woman in the photograph. He was walking past curving side streets that he seemed to know had been laid directly over country roads more recently than a person might assume. The distance between his father's life and his own revealed itself here more acutely than in West London. This was the London of Karamat Lone's childhood. These were the homes of the affluent relatives whose lives his father had aspired to when he sat up all night in his cramped flat in Bradford, studying for exams. Late at night was the only time he could spread his books onto the surface that was kitchen counter, dining table, and workspace for his seamstress mother. On the wall across from him a large poster of the Kaaba, the faithful prostrating themselves around it. Eamonn knew this from a photograph, one of the few his father had from his childhood, about which he had always been too embarrassed to ask. Finally, he approached the street on which Isma had grown up, just off a commercial stretch of Preston Road. Now that he was here, he felt awkward about not simply posting the package, and he walked up Preston Road for a while past a Jewish bakery beside an Islamic bookshop beside a Romanian butcher before turning back toward Isma Street again. He was unable to let go of the feeling that behind these doors existed a piece of his childhood of his father that he'd been too ready to forget. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie, a book that boldly unravels the threads of love, loyalty, and identity while asking us to confront uncomfortable truths about society and ourselves. If you've read Home Fire or plan to, let me know your thoughts below. What resonated with you the most? Or perhaps there's a scene or character you want to discuss further. I'd love to hear your perspective. As always, thank you for spending time here, and if you enjoyed today's exploration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more literary adventures. Until next time, keep turning those pages.